So how mood may impact our health in general? What have you found over the years?
So I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you based on experience, a lot of my clients have complained about brain fog and then chronic fatigue being the two uh, most recognizable symptoms. Other than that, allergy-like symptoms, or when you're about to get a cold, you start to feel like, oh, I'm about to get this cold. You have a runny nose, you're kind of sniffling. Well, a lot of people will say that when they're experiencing mold, they have that feeling, but it never goes away. So they just perpetually feel like they're about to get a cold. Other things can be like skin rashes, anxiety, uh, mood swings, things like that. So, and it's crazy. It sounds like so many other diagnoses out there that it really is hard to pinpoint. So um, I always tell people, if you think it could be mold based upon some of these symptoms, you should definitely get your air quality checked and check it out.
Wow, exactly. Because I'm thinking when you talk about that, I start thinking how much the overlap could be among the diagnosed.
Yeah.
Like we possibly never gonna suspect something wrong with our home environment. And think about how long we stay in the house, especially during the pandemic, right? Last year and this year, we spend so much time in the house. If there's mold around, wow, that definitely can impact us much worse than before.
Yeah, what's crazy is I think we've never really looked at air quality as a big major component to our health. Think about it. Just so you know the statistic, the average person takes about 20,000 breaths per day. So that's 20,000 opportunities to inhale something that could potentially make us sick. This is why something like COVID, who, as we all know, has been this invisible, killer, if you will. Mold is very similar in that regard because mold is actually microscopic. So just like a virus is microscopic, it can impact the body without us really being aware of it.
Yeah, when you talk about the mental fogness and the fatigue, I know when I treat people with insomnia or other sleep disorders, that's also their common complaints. I actually have guests on my show before as patients suffering from some kind of sleep disorders. They actually identify those as their primary symptoms. So there's a huge overlap. How can people tell whether, I'm not sleeping well is because my environment, my air quality, or because allergy, is there something wrong with me, or is my home environment?
It's a great question. There's actually a couple of different things you can do. One, I would say do a walkthrough around your place. Open up closets, check out your HVAC room or where your hot water heater is. Usually you have like this utility room, if you will, and just use your eyes first. Look for those like brown coffee stains. They almost look like. I don't know if you ever worked in an office building. You look up at a ceiling tile, you see like, you're like, how did that coffee stain get there, right? Well, that's actually a sign of water intrusion, right? So I think typically you need water intrusion first before the opportunity for mold to grow presents itself. So when you start noticing those signs of water intrusion by those brown coffee looking stains, that's really indicative of a water intrusion problem that could accompany mold growth. Another thing is the sense of smell. So if you are suddenly smelling like a musty or damp odor, again, that's usually indicative of a water intrusion problem. And that could be the start of an issue or an opportunity for mold to grow is present. And the final trick that I have for you that I really love because it creates this good visual perspective is go right now, put this episode on pause, go over to your toilet tank, open up the toilet tank cover, flip it over, and look to see if you see any signs of mold growing on the underside of the toilet tank or inside the toilet tank. And that's a really good sign that you have mold somewhere growing in your place at a high velocity that allows the mold spore that's getting airborne to fall inside that toilet tank and have that opportunity for mold to grow. Especially if you have a toilet that you don't flush often, you're gonna have that stagnant water sitting there. And if you have mold somewhere else growing inside your home, it's often enough, it'll start to grow inside the toilet tank.
Wow. I think after our recording, I will start checking all my toilet tank immediately. Wow. So I really love that.
It's great. Yeah.
I love the 3 tips you gave. So clear, so simple to do. You just look,
Very simple.
smell, you check a certain place that we never thought of checking. Wow.
Yeah.
So what if we find something, right? We find some suspicion, like we are suspicious, or the smell is a little bit weird. I'm not sure this stain is something dangerous. Should I worry about it? What's the next step?
Okay, so then the next step is, once you think that you may have mold, you definitely want to call in a professional. Just like if you were sick, you'd go to a doctor for help to figure out what's wrong. You want to get a professional. They're called mold inspectors. You can find them on Google. You type in your zip code. And you know what's interesting is, just like finding a good doctor can be difficult, finding a good mold inspector or a good mold team can be difficult too. One of the first questions you want to ask to kind of vet this mold inspector is, hey, how long do you think it's going to take for you to do this inspection? If they say they're going to be in and out in 20 to 30 minutes, they're probably not thorough enough for you. You want someone that's really going to walk around and do a big diagnosis. If you've ever been in part of a home sale where you get like a home inspection right before you buy a house, it's that type of inspection. You want it to be hours long, very thorough, checking every nook and cranny and making sure that any signs of water damage are uncovered, because you can't remediate halfway. You have to find the sources, get rid of the sources, and that's the only way you're going to improve the air quality.
Well, I remember I used to watch those TV shows about house flipping, right? Sometimes you have to tear off walls in order to find the hidden mold. So for us, if we are living in the house, then how a professional team can cover those without tearing everything apart?
Well, that's a great question. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to tear the house apart. It depends on what the history of the home where the water damage occurred and how extensive it is. Now, if you have like a small problem where you had a leak on one wall in one room, it's fairly easy for them to remediate while you live in the house. Because what they're going to do is they're going to set up engineering controls, which consists of plastic containment. They basically build a room inside the room to keep the mold inside the work area. And they'll also use what's called negative air machines or air scrubbers. And what they'll do is they'll put that room under negative pressure. And so negative pressure is like, if you ever walked into an office where like you swung the door open and the door like swings open and you almost fall in, that's negative pressure. You're being pulled in as you open the door to the building. So with negative pressure inside this little work zone, what it does, it makes sure that as they're removing the mold, it's negatively drawing into their equipment and not escaping into other parts of the room, again, making it susceptible for you to impact your body.
Wow. So sounds like it's definitely something need a professional team, and a good professional team, like you mentioned. They can do the inspection for you, and then they're gonna figure out and treat the problem for you, kind of like a good doctor team. So sounds like just by ourselves, if we suspect something, if we're not sure, we just buy air purifier, right? It won't really help much.
That's right. So buying an air purifier when you have mold is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a cut that needs stitches. Okay, so it's not going to be effective at solving the problem. Unfortunately, remediation is really what's required. Having an air purifier is great because it's, just like we purify our water, purifying our air is a good idea. But using an air purifier instead of remediation is probably not going to be effective. And here's why. So I want to give this analogy, which I think will really kind of open up your mind. When you look at mold, you should look at it as you look at a weed. Weeds, they have roots, they grow into the soil, right? And they produce seeds that get into the air. And when they find moist areas of soil, those seeds get more weeds, right? Mold is very similar. It's a living organism. It has roots called hyphae. The roots grow into building materials. And that's very important. What happens if you chop off a weed at the stem, right? It just grows right back because the roots are still in the soil. We know that when we want to remove a weed, we have to pull it by the roots, right? Mold is the exact same way. So what happens is, and I'm sure somebody somewhere can think of this scenario, but if you have mold growing, let's say on a wall, and you take a rag and you take some bleach and you're wiping the mold off the wall, what happens? It starts coming right back, you know, and a day or two later, and it's right back, and you're sitting there scratching your head. It's because you haven't removed the actual root. Okay, so the only way to remove the root in this case would be to actually physically remove the drywall. At that point, you have to remove it. You want to do it under, again, those engineering controls I talked about. You want to throw the wall away at that point. Then you want to clean it with a disinfectant and remove it properly from the structure, right? That's step one. Then we have this other component, and I think this is why I've gotten a lot of attention on the subject, is because what happens to all those seeds that have been produced while the mold was in the wall? And I think that's something that my industry as a mold remediator has really missed the mark on. We know that we can remove the wall, right? We've all seen those stories or those flips where they come in, they put these tents up, they remove the wall, and that's great. But as we mentioned, we have those seeds that have now spread throughout the house. They get into the HVAC system. The HVAC system circulates around. And we've never really before kind of zoomed in on that and said, hey, what do we do about these seeds? And so one of the methods that I created is this cleaning approach that helps remove all of those spores from the environment and, you know, handles the contamination that was often neglected before.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, I totally agree. Sounds like if they grow and spread like that, just tear off a wall may not solve the really root problem. So this method you create, is that like widely used by a lot of mold remediator right now?
You know, it's definitely being used more and more by more remediation companies. They're starting to, you know, wake up. There's MSQ PCR technology that people are adapting more and more. And MSQ PCR technology is basically the technology that tests the dust in the home. And what that can do is it can tell you what species of molds are present and how much. And that's really important because when I mentioned that cleaning process is designed to remove all those species of mold that have been circulating around the house. So by doing that and then using the technology to test it, you're able to see. And so I don't know if they're using my exact process, but they're using their own rendition of that by doing this robust cleaning program. And so everybody's kind of now starting to head in that direction, which is amazing. That's what we need as a society, to really pay attention to mold and do the right way, the remediation.
Wow, that's good to know. Yeah, the more you talk about, the more I'm thinking about why I see so many patients clinically, they cannot sleep well because the allergies, because all the other symptoms. A lot of that is when they're sleeping, they're breathing. And if the mold is in the air, it's not fully cleaned out, and they may keep on having this breathing problem, this sleep problem, no matter how much medications they're taking, since that's, you know, they possibly don't get the right reason behind it.
It's because they're still exposed to it. So they're going out, they're getting medication, but then they're going back home and sleeping in the same environment that they're exposing themselves to that particulate. And you know what allergies are? All allergies are is your body's adverse reaction to a foreign substance entering the body, right? And that can be allergies to food, allergies to pet dander, right? We all have different allergies based upon those foreign substances that enter the body. And with air quality, it's very interesting because it's not just mold. I talk a lot about mold because I think it's one of the biggest things that needs more awareness, but there's other particulate in the air. Have you ever sat by a window and a ray of sunshine passes your view and you start to see like all these particles that are in the air, like these tiny little particles?
Yeah.
You're breathing that in, you know, every breath you take, that's all coming into the body. So that's kind of how allergies start. And there's very, very small particles, and then there's larger particles. The biggest danger that I see with mold, and it's really the particle size. So mold is typically between 2 and 4 micrometers in size, okay? And if you go on the American Lung Association website or EPA or CDC even, it'll tell you that anything smaller than 10 micrometers, the real danger is it's so small that it passes right past the respiratory tract and immediately enters the bloodstream. So, you're immediately passing, self-defense mechanisms that the body has, and it's going straight into the bloodstream. You're immediately having to go into this immune response, right? And try to detoxify that out. And so, certain people are going to detoxify better than others.
Wow. Okay. That's just make it sounds like more and more important for us to do the right thing. So
Yes.
I'm curious, your team, so your team does evaluation and the remediation, right?
No,
Oh,
unfortunately, no. Mainly because, well, first off, in some states it's illegal, and it
oh,
should be illegal everywhere. But it's kind of a conflict of interest,
mm,
right? So the person doing the diagnosis and the person doing the remediation should be separate, because you need that checks and balances.
okay.
Mainly because we're dealing with something that's microscopic, right? We can't see it. So if let's say I'm doing the remediation, it'd be very easy for me to pass my own work, right? Because I did the remediation, I know where I remediated, and I can test right in that area to say, all right, yeah, we know this area is clean. But you want that third party checks and balance to say, yes, that area may be clean, but I'm concerned about this area over here. And so it gives you this really unbiased opinion of what's happening, and a report that'll tell you if more work is needed or not. So I think it's super important to have that separate. But I have a ton of free resources on my website. It can tell you where, based upon where you're located, who's a good mold inspector that we know of in the area that can help you out, which I think is key, because it's so hard to find a good inspector these days, or a good contractor for that matter.
Yes, definitely. I'm so happy you have all those great resources on your website. Just like finding a healthcare provider, sometimes we have a referral list with
Yeah.
providers we trust, we have collaborated with, or at least we heard good things about. And then that way I feel
Yeah.
more confident to introduce them to people whoever are seeking help. So sounds like you've been building up quite a great database about that.
Yeah, especially because what I'm doing is kind of revolutionary in the sense. I mean, it's the technology's been there forever, but what I think I've been good at is connecting the pieces of the puzzle together, right? There's, taking the data from the American Lung Association saying, okay, mold can impact us because of the size of the particle getting into the body. Then you have the studies based upon mold, how to test for it, and you kind of take that and combine and create a better remediation plan. And that's kind of what I've been doing. And hopefully soon we can roll out certifications and licensing for other companies to train other companies how to do it. And I also have a foundation that I am trying to launch this year that'll help remediate for families that can't afford it. And so, I'm really doing everything I can to get this out there to really help people, and, creating awareness that there is a problem and a need for change is really the first step.
Wow, it's amazing that you are helping families who can not afford it. I don't know how much it costs, but I heard other people complain before that when they find a mold, they feel like it's a big financial burden for them
It
to
is.
hire professionals to really check first. Checking it out is expensive, I think, and really start working on that is also not cheap.
You're right. And it's luckily there's home insurance, and there's usually a situation, not in all cases, but in some cases, where a pipe leaked or something happened that was covered by the insurance company. Just like if you have health insurance, right? Certain times, based upon what happened or what's going on, you're covered for certain health insurance, right? It's kind of the same. And just, I'm sure in your field too, not everything is covered by health insurance. It's same with us. Not everything is covered by home insurance, but at least it helps out. And yes, you're right. It could be a financial burden, but the other problem is that if you're constantly putting yourself in a position where you don't have an environment where you can heal in, that also creates a financial burden. So it's, unfortunately, sometimes it's like, let me get over this hurdle and at least have a place I can heal, right? So that I can get back to work.
Right. Think about financial stress versus health consequences. I think if we weigh the short term gain and lose and the long-term gain loss and is kind of clear. We don't want to put ourselves in such a dangerous situation if there are a lot of mold in the home environment. Sounds like based on what you told me, that sounds quite challenging and dangerous, could be potentially harmful for us.
Yeah. You know what else, real quick, is what I'm thinking is it also gets a lot cheaper if we all do our part, right? And what I mean by that is think about this scenario. You live in a house, you do everything you can to maintain it. You're not really aware of any mold, but then you put it up for sale, right? And you didn't check because we're programmed to just think my house is great. The home inspector will find a problem, right? And so we end up sometimes selling somebody a moldy home, and they move into the home and they get sick. And now they're experiencing this financial burden. So if we all know as a consumer, hey, when you're buying a house, check for mold. When you're selling a house, check for mold. If real estate agents are telling people to check for mold, if we have a water damage event and we know to do remediation the right way, right? Now you know exponentially our homes are going to be kept up better. And these situations will be far and few between. But it takes that awareness. If all of us are aware to do better, we will.
Wow, yeah. That's such a good point that we all team up and each stage people, if just like you mentioned, if more and more people have this awareness, then start looking for it, right? So I'm curious, when we buy and sell home, does home inspection, do they check mold at all?
Well, so the home inspection, to become licensed to do a home inspection, I believe it's somewhere like a 200-page document that you have to read through and then pass a test. From what I understand, out of those 200 pages, only a page or two talk about mold. So the other thing is contractors, right? To become a licensed contractor, you do not need to be educated on mold. To become a builder, you do not need to become educated on mold. So it's really a problem that becomes full circle. If we, as a consumer, are more educated on mold, if we make our builders become educated to build houses on mold, if we make our contractors become educated on mold, again, now when they're renovating a bathroom, for instance, they're not going to build back over mold. Now, I had a client once that after I came in to inspect the house to create an estimate for how much it was going to cost to remediate, they had just put in a brand new kitchen. So if their contractor was educated on mold and saw it, he could have called me in before he put all this material in. So now we had to disassemble a brand new kitchen to remediate. It's just, knowledge really solves everything. And right now we aren't educated on mold, enough to really protect ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I look at the home inspection document, I don't remember I saw anything specifically about mold. Wow.
Yeah.
When you talk about your field in general, just remind me of my field. Like I was trained in clinical psychology, but throughout the training, very extensive training for like 7 years, there's 0 hours of sleep training. And then I know for medical school, similarly, they can become medical doctors with only maybe 1 or 2 or several hours of training focused on sleep. So it's like you can, do a lot of work, but without this knowledge, so you don't have the awareness. And then there's some loose end in the process.
Yeah. And it's like that pretty much throughout almost every industry that should be educated on mold almost isn't. Even for my industry, who does the work, right? Mm-hmm. There's a 3-day class that you take to become a licensed mold contractor. 3 days, and now all of a sudden you can start working on people's homes. And I'll tell you, I learn new things every day, and I've been doing it for almost a decade. Every single day I'm learning new things. This is always evolving and adapting, just like medicine is, right? And so how can you call yourself a professional after 3 days of listening to a lecture? You can't, you need the proper training. So I think there's so much that needs to happen. But I think, if we're aware to ask the right questions, if I'm a consumer, and I know someone that's been in business for, just a month, I may not say, you know, I don't know if I want this person to work in my house, especially something that can impact my health. So I think if we're more aware as a society that mold is a problem, and I'm not trying to put a stigma on mold, just to be clear, I think if you're buying a house and there's mold present, as long as you have the report and you understand what needs to be done, and you know you have a person that you can trust to do it the right way, I say go buy the house. You know, I wouldn't have it stop you from moving on with your life. I just think that if we're all educated, we can make the problem less severe.
Definitely, to kind of prevent that first and then catch it the problem early enough. So
Yeah.
not like you have to tear down a new kitchen in order to do the work.
Right.
So I know, I think you wrote a book on this topic, right?
I did.
Yeah. So do you want
So
to
I wrote a
introduce
book.
your
It's
book?
called The Mold Medic. Yeah. So I wrote a book. It's called The Mold Medic. And basically, the reason I wrote it is I realized I wasn't going to solve this problem one house at a time. You know, I would get calls as a remediator to come help a family in need. And I was working, you know, one house at a time. I finished one house, I move on to the next house. And so I realized the only way that I can really help make change is to get the information out there. So I spent a year, I really took the time to document as much as I possibly could, to anytime I ran into a scenario and I'm like, okay, people need to know about this, I would write it down. And after about a year of journaling, I finally started to sit down and write the book. Now, the biggest challenge with mold is it's a scientific subject, right? It's microbiology. That can be a very complex and complicated subject for someone to just pick up and read a book. So when I wrote this book, I wanted it to be simple. I do a lot of storytelling in there and a lot of examples, and I wrote it in very simple layman's terms. There's really not a complicated subject in there. I break down the different species, especially the ones that are known to cause the most harm. So you can, if you do suspect you have mold, you do a test, you can open up my book and look at the species that you have and see what they're known to cause as far as health effects. And, you know, you can kind of make decisions from there on how you want to handle it. I just feel like we needed a guidebook to understand that not all mold testing is the same, not all mold remediation is the same, and that there is something that can be done about it. And so I wrote that book.
Oh, great. Sounds like a very easy guideline for people to search the information they need and give people some hope that, oh, this can be figured out. This can be helped out.
Yes.
So I will put your book to our show note. And what is your website? Your website, you mentioned there are a lot of great resources on there as well.
Yes, I have two websites. So for the book, it's themoldmedic.com. Go on there, check out the book, and you can go ahead and order it right on that website. The second website is allamericanrestoration.com. That website is amazing because it's our service-based company that does the remediation, and I have so many free resources on there. You know, how to file an insurance claim, what to do with an insurance claim, should you get a public adjuster, for instance, when you have an insurance claim, the history of mold, the health effects that are known, symptoms of mold, you know, how to find a good person, what are the questions you would ask. I mean, there's a ton of free, really good resources on there that if you think you have mold, this can kind of help you steer you in the right direction.
Wonderful. Wow, that sounds like very intense, great, helpful information there. Because just as you describe it, I'm thinking if I have this problem in my house, all those sounds like exactly the things I need guidance, right? Especially if I never had this problem before, first time ever, where to get started, how to build insurance. Without you telling me, I did not even think about home insurance may cover this.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And I bet you're going to check your toilet tank too, right?
Right after I hit the button. Yeah. Great, Michael. Thank you very much for all this wonderful information to our audience, our listeners. I think everyone listening to this, people hear a lot of, you know, sleep science, sleep knowledge, but rarely we think about our environment. When we think about sleep environment, we think about a comfortable pillow, comfortable bed, but the air quality is something I feel like got missed so much.
Yeah, yeah, and especially if you're trying to sleep and when you sleep, you take usually deeper breaths, right?
Mhm.
And when those deeper breaths that you're taking contain a lot of particulate, from mold and other, things that occur in our environment, that could be a big problem.
Mm. Wow. Great. So I'm gonna start from my own place to get it figured
Yes.
out. Thank you
And if you need
again.
help, you contact
Ah,
me.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Talk about that. Your service. Do you serve a certain area or you serve across the country?
Across the country. Yeah, we travel all across the country helping people in need.
Wonderful. So if anyone need to seek your company's service, they can just go to your website.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Be happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much for all this wonderful information and those tips for people to do self-check and they can go to your website, find the next step.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Shu, for having me.
Thank you for coming.